discovered at this Egyptian temple, dating back to the 4th dynasty, at the time they were building the pyramids. And we know that this stuff was very capable of transferring its weightlessness to the pan in the lab or whatever else one might associate it with. It would be equally as capable of helping them move the most enormous stones to build pyramids, which incidentally the stones themselves contain. You don't even have to get them from outside. Sandstones and limestones contain these elements in a natural form. And it's very interesting to think now that of all of the ways that they thought perhaps these stones were moved, none of them have ever worked in experiment or trial. This does. So they discovered that this stuff would levitate, they discovered it would disappear, they didn't quite know why or where it went to, and they knew that it was important for energy. They knew that if it was a superconductor, it could attract energy, it could store energy, and it could distribute energy. Yeah, fuel cell, that's what we're looking at here. The old stories of the powder and the Ark of the Covenant began to ring bells here about this potential that they had the ability with the use of this material to store and distribute enormous quantities of energy. Light waves, that's what it works through. It's been discovered now, and in fact just during the last few weeks it's been discovered that even the particles that we're looking at, which are these monatomic gold clusters, when you get down to their atoms, even the atoms now aren't solid. They are not physical property, they are a gaseous substance. So it's no wonder they will levitate and whatever. You know, there's nothing to them. But cooling will make them heavy. Two superconductors can be linked together. You can trigger one in, down here in LA, and you can decide to send electricity to Chicago. All you have to do is the resonance frequency, the two of them together, just to get them in tune, like a couple of tuning forks or whatever. And you turn it off and you can go away for 100 years and come back and it'll still be flowing until you decide to turn off that triggering mechanism. So Hudson got very, very, very excited about all this, and he went along to the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, and he met with the director there, a fellow called Hal Puthoff, who many of you might know or know of. And Hal Puthoff is famous for his studies of zero-point gravity and vacuum energy, that sort of thing. What Puthoff had established, he'd been working on gravity calculations by the Russian physicist Andrei Sakharov from the 60s, and he'd been working out the mathematics for this, and he'd worked out that matter was capable of resonating in different dimensions that weren't ours. But what he calculated mathematically from Sakharov's work was that the moment it begins to do that, at that moment, the moment you know it's on the change, just hooking into the beginnings of another dimension, it will automatically lose 4/9 of its weight. And Hudson went along, he said, look, this is really interesting because 44% mine's losing, and that's the same, it's the same figure, 4/9. And so they agreed, well, yeah, I mean, it's because this stuff is beginning to resonate in another dimension. That's what's happening to it. It should disappear totally, he was told, if it carries on, and he said, it does. Disappears totally. We don't know where it goes, it just disappears. So they decided to test this, and they said that, look, the way to do it is this. If you have a little pile of powder in a pan and it becomes invisible, that means it's still there but you can't see it. So if you've got a spatula and messed it up in the pan, it would come back, when it comes back, in a mess. But we suspect that yours won't. We suspect it will come back in the same shape that it disappeared in. And that's exactly what happened. It didn't come back in a mess. It came back looking exactly like it had disappeared, in that same perfect shape. There you are, they said. It's not invisible. It has simply moved out of our space-time, and it's now been brought back into it. Well, from that moment in time, and around that moment in time, scientists all over the world were talking about these hyperdimensions. Britain's Stephen Hawking, the famous Cambridge professor, Sir Martin Rees, our astrologer royal over there. It took a lot of people by surprise, really. They were saying that there are realms that exist around us and within our environment that we know nothing about. They called them hypersystems. They didn't know how to explain them, and they were coming up with drawings of this sort, trying to explain these sort of parallel situations, but it didn't really work. Such pictures didn't prove anything. It was demonstrated that the concept of another dimension was demonstrated by Cubist art, of all things. Cubist art was based on a principle of showing the dimensions that we can't see. And they had this wonderful thing which they called the Great Prismosaurus. Now, the Great Prismosaurus is an article with millions of facets on it, but it actually has a fourth dimension for everything. Everything that you can see the outside of, you can also see the inside of. What are these dimensions? Well, Martin Rees explains that our dimension is called three-dimensional because it goes up or down, or left to right, or backwards and forwards. We have no objective perception of it. We just live within this realm. There are other universes, they say. Some are crumbled up, so small that we can't even imagine them, but they're accessible. Others, they say, are a millimetre away from us. It's the world where Einstein's theory of then, now, and the future all coming into play at once. It's looking at the 30-storey building from outside as against being in it on its 15th floor. On the 15th floor, you perceive the 15th floor. You can look out of the window and know that you're part of something bigger, but you can't see the other floors. Well, the other dimensions are, in fact, those other floors. You can move into them, you can travel up and you can travel down, but you have to know how. You have to know how to trigger it. They say that gravity, they now understand, gravity is actually a signal leaking out of one of these other dimensions into ours. That's where they say the power of gravity comes from. So we're in this bubble, they say. Our whole universe is a bubble wrapped inside other bubbles that are wrapped inside other bubbles. People like NASA come on the scene and they say, yeah, well, it will be very easy. You know, we can move things between dimensions. We're not actually doing it yet, but we know how to do it because it's really a matter of resonance frequencies. All you have to do is to tune the locations to each other, just like setting up your radio onto a station. You know, when you get it in the right place, the message comes through. Treat it like tuning forks. Set up the vibrations between them. That way we can send anything we want, they say. We can send pictures, we can send text, we can send physical matter. What we've seen over the past 6 or 7 years now is an increasing awareness in the science press of the DNA links with these materials and how important they're becoming. They've talked about how they can be used to re-coordinate the uncontrolled division of body cells. This particular article here from Scientific American, the way it reads is this, that they place these elements at the end of the strands. The researchers examined the electrical properties of short lengths of double helix DNA in which there was a ruthenium atom at each end of one of the strands. Mead and Khayyam, the scientists, estimated from earlier studies that a short single strand of DNA ought to conduct up to 100 electrons a second. Imagine their astonishment when they measured the flow along the ruthenium-doped double helix to find that the current was up by a factor of more than 10,000 times. It was as if, they said, the double helix was behaving like a piece of molecular wire. Wow. It's our monatomic gold wires. They're able to turn the DNA into becoming a part of its structure, or vice versa. The two things can become one. By this means that they build up an integrated circuit of light within the body, and they have the ability to perform cell correction. DNA has memory. What does the memory do? It tells the DNA what it should look like. It tells the cell structure what it should be. What is cancer then? Cancer is malformed or deformed cellular structure. That's all it is. It might be horrific, but it's basically very simple. It's DNA in a muddle. How do you correct it? You make it 10,000 times more intelligent, and the DNA says to itself, I shouldn't be like this. I'm supposed to be like this. And it changes. It will reconfigure itself correctly